February 2021. A father wakes up to a normal day. He has no idea that his 20-year-old son has been dead for 3 days. No phone call, no knock on the door, no notification. His ex-wife knew. She'd already identified the body, made arrangements with a funeral home, and held a memorial service, and cremated their son, all without telling him. By the time Richard Friedman found out his son Hendrix was dead, there was nothing left to see. No chance to say goodbye. Just ashes in an urn that his ex-wife refused to share. And the most disturbing part? The court judgment. Did she have the legal right to do what she did? To hide the death, to cremate without consent, to exclude the father entirely. How is that possible? Does a parent lose the right to know their own child has died? By the end of this video, you'll understand how custody battles can poison families so thoroughly that even death becomes a weapon. And you'll learn why the legal system sometimes protects cruelty when it's technically within the rules. This is the story of Hendrix Friedman, and it's going to haunt you. Before we start, let me be clear about something up front. This isn't a story with a villain and a hero. Both parents in this case were broken by their divorce. Both loved their son, and both handled tragedy in ways that made everything worse. But one parent made a choice that the other will never recover from. Let's start at the beginning. Richard and Colleen Friedman married young. They had a son, Hendrix, who by all accounts was a bright, promising kid. But the marriage didn't last. In 2007, when Hendrix was just 6 years old, they divorced. The court documents describe the divorce as acrimonious. That's legal speak for bitter, hostile, ugly. Like many divorcing parents, Richard and Colleen couldn't separate their anger at each other from their responsibilities as parents. Custody was contentious from the start. Both wanted primary custody. Both accused the other of being unfit. Both used their son as ammunition in their war against each other. Eventually, the court established a custody arrangement. Colleen got primary custody. Richard got parenting time, visits, weekends, the standard arrangement. But Richard didn't exercise that parenting time consistently. Maybe the schedule was difficult. Maybe Colleen made it difficult. Maybe he didn't try hard enough. The court records don't give us all the details. What we know is this. Over the years, the relationship between Richard and Hendrix deteriorated. By the time Hendrix was a teenager, he wasn't seeing his father regularly. By the time he went to college in Colorado, they'd been completely estranged for about 5 years. No visits, minimal contact. A father and son who'd once been connected, now strangers. Colleen raised Hendrix essentially as a single mother. She was the one at his high school graduation. She helped him move into his college dorm. She was his parent in every practical sense. Richard was absent. Whether by choice or circumstance, he wasn't in his son's daily life. But here's what's crucial. Richard was still Hendrix's legal father. The divorce didn't terminate his parental rights. On paper, they had equal legal standing. That legal equality would become the center of everything that followed. In February 2021, Hendrix was 20 years old, in his sophomore or junior year of college in Colorado. Then something happened. What we know is that Hendrix died suddenly and unexpectedly. The exact cause of death wasn't made public. The family kept those details private. Colleen was notified immediately. She was listed as his emergency contact. She was his mother, his primary parent, the person he'd lived with his entire life. She flew to Colorado and made arrangements to have his body transported back to New Jersey. And she made a decision. She would not tell Richard. Think about that for a moment. Your child dies. You know your ex-spouse is that child's other parent. And you decide, deliberately, not to tell them. Colleen contacted a funeral home and made all the arrangements herself. She chose cremation. Now, here's something important about cremation. It's irreversible. Once a body is cremated, there's no going back. No viewing. No chance to see your child one last time. Some religions prohibit cremation. Some families have strong feelings about burial versus cremation. It's one of the most significant decisions you make when someone dies. And Colleen made that decision unilaterally, knowing Richard had no idea his son was even dead. The cremation happened. Then Colleen organized a memorial service. She invited family, friends, and people who knew Hendricks. She did not invite Richard or even tell him there was a service to attend. Days passed. Hendricks had been dead for 3 days. And then, finally, on February 17th, 2021, Richard found out. We don't know exactly how. Maybe someone who'd attended the service told him. Maybe word got around. The court documents don't specify. But imagine receiving that information. Not a phone call from your ex-wife saying our son has died. Not a chance to process it in real time. Just finding out days later that your child is gone and has already been cremated and memorialized without you. Richard was shattered. Not just by the death, though that alone would destroy any parent, but by the exclusion. He'd lost his son twice. Once to estrangement, and now permanently to death. And he never got to say goodbye. Richard did the only thing he could do. He filed a lawsuit. He went to the New Jersey Superior Court, Chancery Division, Family Part. That's the court that handles divorce and custody issues. His demands were simple. 1. He wanted half of Hendricks's ashes. He wanted to be able to create his own memorial, to have something tangible of his son. 2. He wanted half of Hendricks's personal belongings, photos, mementos, items that connected him to the son he'd lost. Colleen's response was unequivocal. No. Her position, through her lawyers, was this. She had raised Hendricks. She had been his primary parent for his entire life. Since 2016, Richard had been estranged for 5 years. He'd chosen not to be in Hendricks's life. She argued that because of that estrangement, she had the sole right to decide what happened to Hendricks's remains. More than that, she had plans for the ashes. She intended to scatter them at places that were meaningful to Hendricks, places he'd loved, places that represented his life. She didn't want to divide the ashes. In her view, Hendricks belonged with her, in death as in life. Now, here's where the legal complexity comes in. In most states, there's a hierarchy for who has the right to control a deceased person's remains. First, the deceased's own written instructions, a will or advance directive. Second, a surviving spouse. Third, adult children. Fourth, parents. But Hendricks was only 20. He hadn't left a will. He wasn't married. He had no children. That meant the decision fell to his parents. Plural, both of them. Richard and Colleen had equal legal standing. They were both biological parents. Neither had lost parental rights. So when they disagreed, how does the court decide? Colleen's lawyers argued that the case was simple. She'd had custody when Hendricks was alive. that custody should extend to making decisions after death. But Richard's lawyers pointed out a fundamental problem with that argument. Custody agreements apply to living children. They're about care, control, supervision, decision-making for minors who need parenting. Dead adults don't need custody. Custody ends at death. So if custody doesn't apply, both parents have equal rights. And if both parents have equal rights, how do you break the tie? The court realized they needed a framework. They couldn't just flip a coin over who gets to keep a dead child's ashes. So they adopted something called the Travers factors, a test from a previous case about disputes over remains. The Travers factors are a 4-part test that courts use when multiple people with equal legal standing disagree about disposition of remains. Now, let's go through them, because this is how the court decided who won. Factor 1. Did the deceased leave instructions? Had Hendricks written anything? A will, a letter, even a text message, expressing what he wanted done with his body after death? No. He was 20 years old and healthy. He hadn't thought about death. So this factor didn't help either parent. Factor 2. Religious beliefs. Did Hendricks have any religious objections to cremation? Some faiths require burial. Others have specific practices around handling remains. The court found no evidence that Hendricks had religious beliefs that would prohibit cremation. So this factor also didn't help Richard. Colleen's choice to cremate wasn't religiously problematic. Factor 3. Who had the closer relationship? Now we're getting to the heart of it. The court had to determine which parent had been more connected to Hendricks during his life. This wasn't even close. Colleen had raised Hendricks. She'd been his primary parent for his entire childhood. She was the one he called when he needed something. She was the one who knew his friends, his interests, his daily life. Richard. He'd been estranged for 5 years. He hadn't been to Hendricks's high school graduation, hadn't helped him move into college, hadn't been part of his adult life at all. The court found, unambiguously, that Colleen had the closer relationship. Factor 4. Who is likely to be administrator of the estate? When someone dies, their estate, their property, belongings, debts, has to be managed by someone, usually a family member. The court determined that Colleen would likely be appointed as administrator of Hendricks' estate, since she'd been his primary caregiver and had handled his affairs. So on factors 3 and 4, Colleen won decisively. And based on that, the court ruled, Colleen has the sole right to control Hendricks' remains. Richard lost. He would not get half the ashes. He would not get to participate in decisions about memorialization. The court's reasoning was clear. Yes, both parents have equal legal standing as biological parents. But when you have to break a tie, you look at who actually had the relationship, and Richard didn't. The court's decision came down on January 5th, 2023, nearly 2 years after Hendricks' death. Richard's lawsuit was dismissed. He would not receive any of his son's ashes. But the court did offer one small concession, a bitter compromise that shows how inadequate the law is in these situations. The judge ordered Colleen to provide Richard with the GPS coordinates of any locations where she scattered Hendricks' ashes. Think about that. Richard can't have his son's remains. He can't create his own memorial. He can't even have a small portion of the ashes. But he can have coordinates, numbers on a map, locations he can visit and stand near places where his son's ashes might be. That was the court's solution. One legal expert who reviewed the case called it technically correct but morally bankrupt. The law gave Colleen the right to exclude Richard, so the court had to rule in her favor. But justice and legality aren't always the same thing. What happened to Richard after this? We don't have detailed information. He's largely stayed out of public view. But we can imagine. He lost his son to estrangement years ago. Then he lost him to death. Then he lost even the right to mourn in any tangible way. He lives with the knowledge that his son died, was cremated, and was memorialized, all without his knowledge or participation. That's a wound that doesn't heal. And Colleen? She got what she wanted legally. She kept the ashes. She scattered them where she chose. She maintained control. But at what cost? She made a choice to exclude her son's father from his own death. People who knew about the case were divided. Some said Colleen was justified. Richard had abandoned Hendricks for 5 years. Why should he get closure now? Others said that no matter the estrangement, a parent has the right to know their child has died. That denying him that was cruel beyond measure. The court noted carefully that Colleen's decision not to notify Richard of the death was callous. That's the word they used. Callous. But callous isn't illegal. And the court's job isn't to punish people for being heartless. It's to apply the law. And under the law, Colleen won. The Friedman case exposes a massive gap in family law. Here's the problem. We have elaborate legal frameworks for custody of living children. Courts can determine who makes medical decisions, educational decisions, religious decisions. But when a child dies, even an adult child, the law gets fuzzy. Most states never anticipated that divorced parents would weaponize death the way Colleen did. Following the Friedman ruling, the New Jersey court made an important procedural note. Cases about disposition of remains should not be heard in family court. Family court deals with custody of living children. These cases belong in probate court, which handles estates and the dead. It seems like a technical distinction, but it matters. It means that custody arrangements from divorce don't automatically give one parent authority over remains. Some states have started introducing legislation to clarify this. New laws that explicitly state, when parents are divorced, both must be notified of a child's death. Both must consent to cremation or burial, unless one parent has completely lost parental rights or cannot be reached after reasonable efforts. The idea is to prevent another Colleen from doing what she did. But laws take time, and they don't fix what's already broken. There's also a larger question here about estrangement and parental rights. Richard was estranged from Hendricks. That estrangement might have been Richard's fault, or Colleen's, or both, or neither. Just the natural drift that happens in some families. Does estrangement forfeit your right to grieve? The court said effectively, yes. If you weren't in your child's life, you don't get to control what happens after death. But some legal ethicists disagree. They argue that the right to know your child has died is fundamental, regardless of the relationship's quality. Death, they say, should be a reset button, a chance for estranged family members to reconcile or at least to grieve, even if the relationship was broken. Colleen took that chance away from Richard, permanently. Let me end with this. Colleen had the legal right to do what she did. The court confirmed that. She followed the law, made decisions within her authority, and won her case. But having the right to do something doesn't make it right. She knew Richard would want to know his son had died. She knew he'd want to say goodbye. She knew cremation was irreversible. And she did it anyway. Maybe she was acting from years of accumulated anger. Maybe she genuinely believed Richard had forfeited his right to participate by being estranged. Maybe she was in such deep grief that she couldn't think clearly. All of those things can be true. and her choice can still be wrong. Richard will never recover from this. He'll carry the trauma of being excluded from his son's death for the rest of his life. And Hendricks? He's the real victim in all of this. He spent his childhood caught between warring parents. He grew up in the wreckage of their divorce. He was estranged from his father for reasons we'll never fully understand. And even in death, he became a weapon in their war. If you're watching this and you're in a custody battle, or you're estranged from your child, or you hate your ex-spouse so much you can't see straight, please hear this. Your children don't belong to you. They're not possessions to be controlled or weapons to be used. They're human beings who deserve parents who can put aside their anger long enough to do the right thing, even in death. Especially in death. Because there are no second chances, there are no do-overs. Just ashes scattered in places you're not allowed to visit, and GPS coordinates on your phone. Rest in peace, Hendricks Friedman.